by the financial support of AARP New Hampshire.
Our regularly scheduled program will not be seen, so that we may bring you the following special presentation. Tonight, a Commitment 2014 special, brought to you by WMUR, in partnership with the New Hampshire Union Leader and the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, the Granite State Debates. This evening, the 1st Congressional District candidates.
And good evening, everyone, and welcome to night number 1 of our Granite State Debates. I'm Josh McKelvin. Tonight, we are hearing from 2 candidates who are eager to once again represent the 1st Congressional District. Now, this is a district that includes Manchester, the Seacoast, parts of the Lakes region, and these 2 candidates, well, they know each other pretty well, too. This is the 3rd time that they have faced off on the ballot. Congresswoman Carol Shea Porter serving her 3rd term overall in Washington. She is a former social worker who also lives in Rochester. She is married with 2 children. She is facing Republican challenger Frank Ginta, who is looking to return to Congress after serving down there from 2011 to 2013. Frank Ginta is also the former mayor of Manchester. He is also married with 2 children. And candidates, thanks very much for joining us tonight. And audience, we have asked you that you hold your applause during the debate, except for right now. Audience, go ahead and welcome our candidates. Thank you very much. That out of the way, we're going to talk about the rules a little bit, the guidelines for tonight's debate. Candidates, you'll each have 1 minute to answer questions. They'll allow about 30 seconds for rebuttal if needed, or some follow-ups if we want to stay on that particular topic. We'll have a round of candidate-to-candidate questions you've been made aware of as well, and a question or 2 will come from voters who have sent them in. But most of the topics will come from either myself or the panelists that you see before you. Speaking of that panel, let's introduce them tonight. We have Dan Toohey of the New Hampshire Union Leader, James Pindell of WMUR Political Scoop, and Kathleen Ronayne from the Associated Press. So with all the intros out of the way, let's get started and go to our first question. That goes from Dan Toohey to our 1st Congressional District incumbent, Carol Shea Porter.
Thank you. The governors of New York and New Jersey have instituted a mandatory quarantine on any health care workers returning from West Africa. Do you agree with that decision? And should they bear clear federal policy on this issue?
Well, I think the way they went about it was wrong. My understanding is that they had the nurse set aside and not at home or anything like that. I mean, it was very, very severe. But also, we do need to recognize that there is a slight risk if somebody is infectious and out in crowds. So I think what would really make sense is to say, you know, stay at home through those days and not necessarily be like locked up, but not in close contact with people. I think we've always done that whenever we've had any kind of exposure to something, and self-quarantine I think is a good thing, and cracking down a little bit on people who are not paying attention to the rules I think is essential to protect all of us. But the risk is slight, and we know that, so we have to be very careful not to get too hysterical about it, just very cautious and careful.
Let's get the same question to you.
Well, thank you, Dan, for the question. And I differ very much from Carol Shea Porter. I think this is a very serious issue, as many Americans do. We've had 5 weeks now of this president, this administration, and this Congress knowing that Ebola is a direct threat to not just West Africa, but to America. We need to have an immediate travel ban. I don't understand why the President of the United States refuses to have a travel ban put in place. If you have somebody who comes to the United States, because we don't have a travel ban, who may have been affected, we certainly don't want any other American to get affected, so we have to take immediate proper measures to make sure that those individuals are properly quarantined, and there is no ability for that individual to spread the risk of Ebola. We do not have any leadership from this president. We do not have leadership from the CDC. And I think people are rightly concerned because there's a lack of leadership on this issue.
Congresswoman, a quick follow-up here. Just how seriously do you deem the public health threat when it comes to Ebola?
Well, I think it's very serious. You know, this obviously is a terrible illness, and I think that we need to be very careful. And I have called for a temporary ban on non-essential travel until we really get a handle on it. But I think the CDC and the NIH, they were flat-footed to start, but I think that they have now responded. And I also believe that it was a really bad idea to cut the funding for the CDC and NIH and not to have a Surgeon General, which I would put in Frank Ginta's lap because they voted to cut those. So we need to make sure that we have the proper amount of public funding to take care of a public health care. But we also need to be careful that we're not absolutely assuming that every third person is going to have Ebola. It's just not so. But we need to be careful, absolutely.
Mr. Ginta, your opponent was referring to the sequester and the cuts that went along with that.
Sure. Well, I think Carol Shea Porter thinks every answer to our challenges is to spend more money. The reality is that she should have read the IG's report from Homeland Security that was released just this week. There was a hearing in the House of Representatives just this week that she could have attended. I took a look at that IG report. It said emphatically it was not a money issue. It was a management issue. When I was mayor of the largest state in largest city in New Hampshire, the city of Manchester, when I was mayor, what we used to do is focus on preventative measures, making sure that we would go through time and time again that we were properly prepared for any kind of challenge that the city could come under. It has to be proper management and proper preparation.
All right, let's move forward now. Next question comes from James Pindle on the panel, and this again does go to Mr. Ginta.
That's right. You know, over the weekend there was a new poll come out that said that a record number of Americans have just had it with Republican politicians and Democratic politicians. They say there's too much talking and not enough doing. Mr. Ginta, when you were a member of Congress, you were a member of the least productive Congress in U.S. history. That was until you returned back to Congress, Congressman Shea Porter, and now you are a member with that title of the least productive Congress in history. So I want to start with you, Mr. Ginta. With so little getting done, what does it matter? What difference does it make if you're elected over your opponent?
Oh, I think it matters a great deal, James. Look, our country is hurting. Carol Shea Porter has been in Congress for 6 years. And what do we have to show for it? $18 trillion in long-term debt, a continuing deficit at $550 billion. Families in New Hampshire are struggling to try to make ends meet. People have to get 2 and 3 jobs to just try to meet the same weekly wage that they were making when Carol Shea Porter first came into Congress. Your representative matters a great deal. When I was mayor, I worked bipartisanly to balance budgets, to cut taxes, to make people safer, and I took that same approach when I served one term in Congress. I was able to get 3 bills signed into law by this President of the United States, worked in the House, worked in the Senate in a bipartisan fashion, came home, had 6 job fairs, trying to get people back to work. Those things matter. Who represents us does matter very, very much.
Congresswoman Shea Porter, does it make any difference at all? And is passing legislation really the best metric? I mean, does it make any difference?
Well, I think you have to point out the fact that I was also part of the most productive Congress in history since Roosevelt. And the difference was who was in charge of the House. When the Democrats ran the House, we were very productive and got a lot of legislation through, kept the country from falling into depression. That was important, and many other accomplishments. And then when the Republicans, driven by the Tea Party in 2010, of which Mr. Ginta falls in that category, took over, then it got very, very difficult. So we have Speaker John Boehner, who is unable to get his foot soldiers together. But I would point out that Frank says he's bipartisan, but he wasn't even bipartisan with his own party. When they had the Ryan budget, they had a substitute budget, which was called the Republican Study Committee budget, and Frank voted for that too. And the Republicans had to come and vote that budget down. The Democrats decided to vote present and make the Republicans say no to that budget. That budget was not a bipartisan budget, and it was a budget that would have destroyed the middle class and destroyed 30% of government agencies would have been cut. So I would say that you have to look at who's in charge and who's been running the place.
All right. Let's keep it on the topic of record right now. We're going to have another similar topic. Let's go to the next question, though, coming from Kathleen Ronayne from the Associated Press.
Congresswoman, talking about productivity, can you tell us about one piece of legislation that you sponsored and led the way on that's made a difference for New Hampshire?
Yes, I can. I am very, very proud of the health care law. It has brought tremendous changes for people who did not have insurance before. It has also allowed families to keep their children under the age of 26. It has stopped discriminating against women for being female in health care. It's lifted the caps that that insurance companies put on health care for people. So if they were sick too long, they would get kicked off. So this is a remarkable piece of legislation that still needs improvement, and we know that. But unfortunately,
the budget is out of balance by $550 billion. We have an $18 trillion debt. From the time Congresswoman Shea Porter was in office over the past 6 years, it has doubled from $9 trillion to $18 trillion. But on the other side, we need to have pro-growth economic policies. I think the most important thing on the individual side of tax reform is to go from 7 down to maybe 3 or 4 rates, simplify the tax code, allow everyone to file their taxes on a postcard. And on the corporate side, we've got to be more competitive internationally. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world at 35%. It's why companies are leaving our country. We've got to reduce that, get more competitive so we can have jobs like Apple and Burger King continue to come back here to America and have our pro-economic approach start to grow again.
Congresswoman?
Well, I think that we need to build our infrastructure. An infrastructure bank would be a great idea. A jobs bill would be very helpful. I think we need to promote small businesses. We also need an export-import bank. I have some legislation to help startups take $10,000 and be able to make that permanent, so that encourages them to do that. I'm all for lowering the corporate tax rate, but right now it seems like merely a suggestion. I'm happy to lower it, but I think we need to also enforce it and make sure that people pay it. We need to give the middle class tax breaks and small businesses tax breaks. So we have a lot of work to do, and we need to focus on changing our tax code so it's fair to the middle class. This is all about fairness, this election, and we know that it has gone off the track. So we really need to take care of the middle class and create jobs.
All right. So our viewers have spoken about the topics that we asked them about earlier, what they wanted to hear, and they decided, surprise, surprise, they want to hear about the IRS. And we're going to start with you, Mr. Ginta. So the question is, percent, by the way, 46% of our reviewers said they wanted to hear about this. So we're going to start with you, Mr. Ginta. What kind of reforms do you think needs to take place at the Internal Revenue Service?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is audit the IRS. I mean, the IRS seems to be going after everyday Americans. Just this week, there's a new report out that they're confiscating people's money without just cause. This is a significant problem. Carol Shea Porter continues to support the IRS at every single turn. Wouldn't hold Lois Lerner in contempt when just about every other person in America and the state of New Hampshire was frustrated with what Lois Lerner was doing, going after different organizations and different groups. So the first thing you need to do is start with an audit and start to rebuild that lack of comfort that Americans have with the IRS.
Congresswoman Shea Porter, same question.
Yes. Well, you know, Frank Ginta said that he wanted to abolish the IRS. Now, think about that. That's our business accounts. That's accounts receivable. That's how this country pays its bills. That's how we get Social Security, Medicare, and take care of everything in this country. I want to reform the IRS. He wants to abolish the IRS. I asked him that again, and he said yes, he wants to abolish it. So that is a very bad business practice. Reform, absolutely. And I was shocked myself to find out that the IRS had overstepped this. We just read about it this week. And so, you know, we can fix this, and we should fix this. And I'm okay with making sure that we audit and make sure that they are responsible and have to answer. We need better oversight. But we cannot abolish the IRS. 97% of the money that comes in to run the country comes through that. That's a Tea Party idea, and it's been used over and over again. You want to abolish the Department of Education, abolish the IRS. That's not going to work, Frank. We need to reform it.
Mr. Ginta?
Listen, I don't think many Granite Staters are supporting the IRS in their actions. You can have a very simple tax collection process in this country if you simplify the tax code. So why don't we focus on simplifying the tax code, and instead of having IRS agents come after individuals, come after small business owners, come after nonprofits, why don't we just have a very simple process of simplifying the code, and you can have a very simple tax collection process.
All right. Our viewer poll was so close, we're going to go with the number 2 as well. 46% wanted to hear about the IRS, 43% wanted to hear about college costs. So with that question, let's go to James Spindle.
That's right. This question is going to go to Congresswoman Shea Porter. As you know, New Hampshire continually ranks #1 in terms of the student debt load that our residents have. And many students are graduating college with loans the sizes of some home mortgages. So what should the government do, if anything, in helping reduce the cost of a college education?
Well, you're absolutely right. And we see young people coming out absolutely burdened with debt, and it keeps them from being able to participate in our economy if they are paying all towards their interests there. So I support Elizabeth Warren's bill that would allow students to renegotiate the price of their loans. And unfortunately, we can't get through the Republican House, but it's a very, very good bill, and I think that would help them a lot to lower it. I also, when I was on the Education and Labor Committee, got an amendment through that increased the amount of Pell Grant, and we took the middleman out of the student loans, so they go directly to the federal government, which saved the subsidy money that we were giving to them. But we have to do more. Community colleges. I'm very proud of the work that I did to bring money to community colleges. They're working with businesses now in advanced manufacturing and for the training. So we have to make sure that we have ways for people to learn, whether it's online or whether it's community colleges, that they get lower interest rates, and that when they get out, that they are able to stagger their loans so that they're not hit up front. And we did pass a bill for that too.
It doesn't surprise me that Congresswoman Shea Porter supports Elizabeth Warren. It is very shocking to me because in terms of New Hampshire, I don't think that we believe in Elizabeth Warren's approach. She, like you, think that the federal government is the answer to every problem that America has. And that is just not true. You've been in Congress for 6 years. You have not been able to solve this problem at all. Here's what we need to do. The middleman that you refer to was the private sector. We lost jobs here in Concord, New Hampshire, as a result of that legislation being passed, which was part of the Affordable Care Act. You need to bring the private sector back, number one. Number two, so everyone has access through their local institutions for better loans, number one. Number two, we need to have a very different system in place where you can go to school year-round. Make affordable college less than 4 years if you can possibly get through in a 2.5 or 3 year process. And then finally, you have to have jobs for college students to get to. That will allow them to pay off their loans and encourage them to go back and get advanced degrees in their future careers.
All right, let's get to our next question coming from Kathleen Ronayne to Congresswoman Carol Shea Porter.
Congresswoman, do you believe women have achieved equality in the workplace? And if not, what can government do to help solve the problem?
Well, I think both Frank Ginta and I agree that they haven't, because his ad said that they would punish employers that were not fair to women in their pay. So I think we both agree that we're still not where we need to be on the pay parity. So I think what we can do is paycheck fairness. If we pass the Paycheck Fairness Act, which Frank has not signed on to, but I have, then that would help. We did something with Lilly Ledbetter. I was very proud of that we passed the Lilly Ledbetter legislation to help women who had been discriminated against. And I think that we also need to make sure that they have other things to help them be able and help their families and the men in their lives as well. By making child care affordable, that's important, and by making sure they have sick pay. A lot of men and women do not have one single day of sick pay, and I think that will help as well.
Mr. Ginta, your take on the issue?
Well, look, I have a mother. I have a wife who, in her own right, put herself through college and graduate school and works in the private sector and spends a lot of time making sure that our two kids, Colby and Jack, are raised properly. My daughter, Colby, is 11 and is an entrepreneur at heart already. So I absolutely want to see fair pay for men and women. The first thing we need to do is look at the act that was passed back in the 60s and make sure that act is being followed. If there is any actor that is not paying someone equally, we have something under the law already to go after those companies, and I will continue to be vigilant and ensure that happens.
What do you say we do another viewer question now? This one's coming from Kevin Joyce out in Stratham. When you served in Congress, how much time per week did you typically spend fundraising? And what specific ideas would you be willing to propose to reform how campaigns are currently being funded and paid for? Question for you, Congresswoman.
Well, you know, I don't take any corporate PAC money or DC lobbyist money, so I didn't spend very much time on the phone because I wasn't accepting that money. And Frank does, so he'll have to answer his question about how much time he spent to get that money. So I support all kinds of campaign finance reform. Constitutional amendment, the Disclose Act, none of which Frank has signed on for. The Disclose Act, to at least say, who are these people that are putting this money in there? Fair elections now, I support that. Every single piece of legislation that comes through for campaign finance reform, I am on because I think it is absolutely, and people can see all those ads. They know that that's all money, and we need to reform that. I heard Frank Ginta say over and over again that this is just, the Citizens United is just a question of free speech. If that's the case, some appear to be freer than others. We have got to fix this.
Mr. Ginta, you want me to repeat the question?
No, thank you very much. I'm happy to answer it. Look, I think most members of Congress spend far more time than they would prefer fundraising. Our fundamental obligation is to represent our districts. When I served in Congress, I came home every weekend, made sure that I focused in Washington, D.C. on my legislative agenda on behalf of the state, but then came home. I had 6 job fairs trying to get people back to work, held 3 different summits, manufacturing and education summits, making sure that we tried to bridge the relationship between manufacturing and educators here in our state so we can have better opportunities for jobs. And I even held a women's summit trying to ensure that we had women's issues like fair pay addressed in the state of New Hampshire. But Carol Shea Porter has been in Congress for 6 years. She was part of the majority, and nothing's been done on the laundry list that she claims that she would like to see accomplished. Very, very simple. Let's have transparency so you know where every single dollar is coming from.
All right, let's move forward to a very specific topic now. The question's coming from Dan Toohey, directed at Mr. Ginta.
Mr. Ginta, on the issue of gun control, you said the focus for reform needs to be on criminals, not law-abiding citizens. What is one specific thing that you'd like to see done on this very important issue?
Well, look, I served as mayor of our state's largest city, and at a time when violent crime was on the rise. So I implemented the CompStat program, increased the number of police officers on the streets, worked with different state and federal agencies for undercover operations, and we were able to reduce violent crime in our state's largest city by 17%. But beyond that, you have to go focus your attention and time on criminals and illegal guns. The Second Amendment advocacy groups in the state of New Hampshire, as well as in the nation, all give Carol Shea Porter failing grades for protecting the Second Amendment. I support New Hampshire and its willingness and its interest in having a Second Amendment right. The problem is people like Carol Shea Porter want to go after individuals who are law-abiding citizens. That is not the answer. We went after criminals when I was mayor, and that worked.
And Congresswoman, the Newtown Elementary School massacre led to many calls for more effective gun laws. Do you favor any new laws that would have prevented that tragedy?
Well, we really need to have background checks. And, you know, I liken it to this. Almost everybody's law-abiding. I totally support the Second Amendment. I'm fine if you want to have a gun to hunt, if you want a gun to defend yourself, if you just want to collect guns, I'm fine with that. But we do need to find out when people are walking around, should they have guns? Everybody understands that there are some people that are dangerous to themselves and dangerous to others. So if you walk into a store right now and they're a licensed gun dealer, you're going to have what's called a NIC check. It's very fast. And, of course, everybody's records are generally fine. There's no problem. But if you go online or you go to a gun show, you can avoid that check. And that's the problem. We need to have background checks. People in New Hampshire want that background check. I liken it to going into an airport. 60% go through a metal detector and 40% go around. It's the same thing if they would finally allow people to just miss the metal detector, none of us would feel as comfortable about it. And this is what's happening here, that we have some people who are not eligible to get guns. They don't go into a store. They go online or they go to a gun show. I think they should have a check also.
Thank you very much. We're almost out of time. We want to get a couple of quick ones here. New Hampshire-centric. I know it's not a federal issue, but kind of want to get your take on these as New Hampshire residents. And Mr. Ginta, we'll start with you. Do you support, as a New Hampshire resident, the Northern Pass project?
I think there's a way that we can get to common ground. The reality is we've had 3,000 megawatts of power taken off the grid in 2014 through 2017. That's part of the reason why you're going to continue to see electric rates soar this winter and into the several years going on beyond that. So I want to find that common ground that I think we can achieve.
Do you support the project? Yes or no?
I think that if we find that proper middle ground, I think we can achieve that opportunity to bring more power into New England, into New Hampshire.
Congresswoman?
If they put it underground, absolutely. If they don't, no.
And quickly, as New Hampshire residents, Congresswoman, would you like to see New Hampshire have a casino?
No, I would not. I would not. You know, the time has come and gone. You're looking at various states that are now struggling with the casinos. They're not making the money there. So I think we're about 10 years late to it, and it doesn't make economic sense to me.
Mr. Ginta?
I think there's so many better ways that we can jumpstart our economy here in the state of New Hampshire. I mean, we had negative economic growth for almost the entire time that Carol Shea Porter has served in Congress. There are so many other things that we can accomplish for economic growth other than casinos.
I got to move on, but 57 minutes into the debate, at least you found some common ground when it comes to casinos. All right, thanks very much. Final portion of our debate now, and in lieu of a closing statement, we're going to go to a closing question, something that really isn't issue-based. We drew on the order to that earlier today, so Mr. Ginta, you will go first. Sorry to tell both of you, though, that neither of you are as wealthy as your typical member of Congress. So, have the financial challenges that you have faced in your personal life shaped your understanding of the economic problems facing the families in the 1st District?
Well, I'm the first in my family to go to college. My folks did not go to college. They started a small business almost 50 years ago, and I was very proud to help them in their business on the weekends and evenings. I worked several jobs that were minimum wage jobs, including working at a gas station, working as a waiter, and I worked on a sheep farm. Those were the experiences in my life that taught me the opportunity for forward progress, which I think everyone in America wants. It's how Morgan and I are raising our kids, Colby and Jack. We want to make sure that every child in America has the upward mobility capability, and that's something that I think still can be alive again in America.
Mr. Ginta, thank you. Congresswoman?
I do understand the middle class. I grew up in a large 3-generation family, and so both my parents had small businesses, and so we all worked, and I wasn't paid. It never occurred to me that we could be paid. We were all working together. I put myself through college working on factory floors and doing every kind of job imaginable, including stripping beds and cleaning motel rooms, which I hope I never have to do again. But I respect the work because I understand how hard people work. Then when I got married, my husband was in the military, and that was not a big paycheck. And then when we had children and I chose to spend the days home and work in the evenings, I took a big cut in pay, even though I had worked and had degrees, because I wanted to do that. So all of our lives, we've had to trade off to make sure that we had the right balance of being able to take care of our families, be able to spend time with our families, and to stretch the check. So yes, I understand.
Thank you very much, both, for being here, because that's going to conclude tonight's debate. And thank you very much for the candidates coming in, obviously, as well. Big thanks to our panel and the audience for being here tonight. So our next debate, tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. That will be in the 2nd Congressional District. Congresswoman Annie Kuster and her Republican challenger, Mary Linda Garcia.
And voted 56 times to cancel it. We haven't been able to do the fixes. I said all along that this was legislation, massive piece of legislation like Social Security and Medicare, that would need to have some fixes along the way. But ultimately, when I see and hear from people who talk about being able to go to a doctor now, being able to get health care, doctors tell me, hospitals tell me, I think that's a huge success, and I'm proud of it.
Mr. Ginta, same question for you. One piece of legislation that you led the way on?
Well, I'm a little surprised to hear that Congresswoman Shea Porter is most proud of a piece of legislation that 65% of New Hampshire residents oppose. This piece of legislation is requiring 17,000 people in the state of New Hampshire to pay penalties next year to the tune of $23 million. Think about the amount of money that is and how we could redirect those resources to more effective ways than paying the federal government to pay for this piece of legislation. Not only that, it costs $2 trillion, and only 6 million people so far are covered. That's more than $300,000 per individual that taxpayers are paying. The pieces of legislation that I'm proud of are the 3 that I got signed into law. The most important, I think, was for veterans, making sure that Clark's Veterans Cemetery in the Philippines is finally taken care of by American American dollars again.
All right, you take 30 seconds to follow up. I can see that you...
I would urge people to go to thomas.gov. Frank Ginta did not get 3 pieces of legislation signed in. He did not get it through the House and through the Senate and signed by a Democratic president. His name is not on that. I know that you had a provision that got wrapped into a Senate bill, and good for you, but you did not get 3 bills signed in. And the reality is that in this Congress today, with a Republican House and a Democratic Senate, it would be darn near impossible to do that.
Actually, I have to say, when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker, she did not allow the minority party at the time, which was the Republican Party, to bring amendments to the floor. The one thing that John Boehner changed as soon as he became Speaker was to allow anyone, a freshman or a member of the minority party, to bring amendments to the floor. Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas has brought more amendments to the floor this term than there have been votes in the United States Senate. So there is ample opportunity for a Republican or a Democrat to try to effectuate change on behalf of their constituents.
Plenty of time to engage. We've got to move on, though, because we do want to tell you about some viewer interaction that we have tonight. We want to know what issues that you'd like to hear over the next half hour. So you can do that. You can tell us by calling or texting the number that you see on your screen right now, or voting on our website. During the second half of this debate, you tell us what topic you definitely want to hear about. Set up there for you. Text number 1 for IRS, text number 2 if you want to hear about college costs, or 3 if you want to be a little more specific and talk about the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. We're going to have a look at those results coming up in the next half hour. All right, now this debate, by the way, is commercial free, but that doesn't mean you've escaped the ads entirely. They have been pretty hard to miss, no question about that. So we want to take a few minutes tonight to look at a few of the claims that you are each making about your opponent in some of these ads. So we're going to start there. Let's begin with an ad from the campaign of Carol Shea Porter.
Snooping on Americans. Frank Ginta allowed the NSA to do just that, to snoop on our private phone calls and to let government take our library records without a warrant. Frank Ginta even refused to stop bosses from demanding Facebook passwords.
All right, Mr. Ginta, you want to respond to that ad?
Yeah, it's very simple. Here's a situation where as soon as I became the nominee, within 12 hours, Carol Shea Porter was running negative ads against me as the Republican nominee. As a matter of fact, every Democrat incumbent was doing that in the state of New Hampshire. I think that these campaigns should be about public policy and substance. And at some point, you've got to respond, because if you don't respond, people just assume that these are true facts. The reality is, nothing I voted for gave this administration or the NSA the ability to do what they did. They overstepped the existing law, and that had to be changed in this Congress as a result. What I've learned is that we have to be far more narrow with the legislation that is written, that is authored and written, because this administration has absolutely overstepped its bounds.
Right.
And it should not be doing that.
Congresswoman, your opponent basically says this ad stretches the truth. You put your name on this ad, said you approved it. Defend your claims.
It's absolutely the truth, and he knows that's the truth, that when he had a chance to stand up and speak when it was reauthorization, there were 2 amendments. One was the Nadler Amendment, another one's a Perlmutter Amendment, and he wouldn't even stop the government from looking at the library records, and that is a fact. And for the Perlmutter Amendment, he had an opportunity to at least tell businesses, that prospective employers, that they couldn't ask for the passwords, and he wouldn't do that. But the other part of that is, if we're talking about negative ads, he has one today that is really unbelievable. 3 charges against me, all of which have been debunked, called Pants on Fire, 4 Pinocchios, etc. So, you know, Frank, that ad today, I have to say, was amazing to me. So please don't say that you're running positive campaign.
Back to the NSA, I voted for 7 amendments that got signed into law on the existing bill that did exactly what she claims I didn't do. I actually was protecting individuals and the ability of the government to go snoop. I voted for the 7 amendments that got attached to the bill that passed.
All right, let's take a look at another ad. This ad comes from the campaign for Frank Ginta, targeting Carol Shea Porter.
Carol Shea Porter wants to make sure we know who she stands for.
So you know who I stand for.
And that's why Shea Porter voted to collect her salary even if Congress doesn't pass a budget.
So you know who I stand for.
And she voted to give members of Congress first-class travel and health care for life.
Okay, so first-class travel and raises. Your thoughts on that ad, Carol Shea Porter?
Okay. He knows that that's been totally debunked, the first-class travel, and you know that that was put in the Ryan budget, and the Democrats did that to you, too. So, you know, it's a poison pill inside something, so they have something to talk about. It's all debunked, and people can just check it out by PolitiFact. I mean, I'm not going to get in a silly argument about this. They can just look at PolitiFact, or they could go to the Washington Post or one of those fact-checkers.
Defend this ad.
Well, facts are stubborn things, Josh. You actually did vote for this, and I voted against the same very things that are in this ad, because the piece of legislation, the budget, the House budget that was passed, is something that I did vote for. So the reality is you did vote to give yourself these benefits, and I don't think taxpayers in the state of New Hampshire, particularly in this economy, feel that that's appropriate.
Take 15.
First of all, those aren't benefits. You don't get health care for life. I know that you know that. Also, you voted for the same thing because it was put in the Democratic budget, which you voted no against, so you actually voted for yourself for first-class travel. But you really didn't, because what you were doing was saying no to the Democratic budget. So you know that's true. Chris Van Hollen's Democratic budget, you know that's true.
It sounds like a lot of Washington speak. The bottom line is I voted for the bill that passed the House of Representatives that eliminated those items.
Right, let's move forward now. The next question coming from our panel, Kathleen Ronayne from the Associated Press for Carol Shea Porter, I believe.
You both support the use of airstrikes in combating the terror group ISIS, but without boots on the ground, which you both don't support, how can we be sure the strikes are working and that the collateral damage, including civilian casualties, isn't doing more harm than good? Congresswoman?
Thank you for that question. I serve on the Armed Services Committee and had a number of hearings on this, and the problem that we have is that there really aren't any moderates, and Syria is in the middle of a civil war. So if we put boots on the ground and we were in the middle of a civil war or close to it, the allegiance and alliances change daily, weekly, so we would be putting our men and women at risk because they just simply would not be able to ascertain who was friend, who was foe. And I also believe that the countries in the region have a great interest in doing that. The military in Turkey certainly can fight and should. They are right on the border there. We know that the Iraqi soldiers need to stand up again. We know that the Kurds have been fighting, but to give an idea, and good fighters against ISIL, but to give an idea how difficult this is, the Kurds have been fighting against ISIL, and Turkey bombed the Kurds last week. So we simply can't put our own troops there. We can provide the airstrikes, which gives a little breathing room, and we can provide other assistance, but it's a bad idea to put troops on the ground.
Mr. Ginta?
Kathleen, the President and this Congress, including Carol Shea Porter, knew about this almost a year ago. The President did not act. Carol Shea Porter is on the House Armed Services Committee, the Committee of Jurisdiction, and she has not commented for almost the better part of a year on what the strategy should be. That's a lack of leadership representing New Hampshire, and it's a lack of leadership representing America. What we need is a clear, identified strategy from the President of the United States. At that point, we then should require, based on the War Powers Act, an up or down vote on whether we are going to war. Everyone references the fact that we're at war, but there has not been a vote in this Congress. So unless and until I see some sort of real plan that has the stated goal of eliminating ISIS, I couldn't support it. This Syria position, 5,000 people. There was no plan there beyond that, and I think we need a very clear stated plan on how to eliminate and eradicate this very serious threat.
So, Mr. Ginta, let's say that stated goal comes from a general on the ground there that says, you know what, if you put boots here, small force, whatever, in 6 months we should be able to eradicate ISIS, this terror group. Are you in support of that?
I think you have to look at what the generals on the ground specifically are saying, but I would hope what it would include would be our friends and allies in the region that would put boots on the ground. This is a problem that has to be resolved in the region of the country, but airstrikes to support that notion of other boots on the ground I think is a good idea, but I'd have to see the specifics of the plan before I could say up or down. The door's open to having troops from the region on the ground, but again, I'd have to see what the specific plan is, and this President hasn't provided that. Carol Shea Porter on House Armed Services for the better part of a year has not proposed that.
Your thoughts?
Well, you know, he knows so many things that just aren't so. I mean, I've been sitting on the Armed Services Committee with many hearings, and if Frank were following this, he'd know that there was a wide variety of opinions about what to do, which is very complicated, obviously. So he's just not right.
Would you support boots on the ground if a general says we need him here, we can do the job if we get him?
No, I would not support troops on the ground unless this is an absolute unified everybody, and that is not the situation that we have because of the war in Syria. But the other part of it is that if you want to put boots on the ground and you want to really, then you shouldn't have voted for the sequester, which cut the military budget, because that's the other problem that I have been listening to from these generals and others, that the sequester cut the defense budget, and they are struggling. I'm on the readiness subcommittee. So, Frank, you're not on that committee, so you're not in Congress. You don't know. So I just wish you'd stop saying that we've done nothing, because the reality is that we have been looking at this. It's a very complicated situation.
Take 30 seconds, sir.
Well, Carol, you're right. I'm not in Congress. You are, and you've been there for 6 years. And the reality is, sitting on the House Armed Services Committee, you have not made one proposal. You have not led on one idea over the course of the last year as to how to eliminate ISIS. And that is part of your obligation and responsibility, not just as a member of the committee, but as a member of Congress who's representing New Hampshire. That should be something that you could clearly articulate to the state of New Hampshire, and so far you haven't been able to do so.
Quickly, please.
Well, I hope that you will decide to Google my name and take a look maybe at some of the interviews that I've had where I have discussed that, or you could look at my newsletter where I've discussed that, or you could just ask me, because we actually have done a lot of things.
All right, we're going to move forward now with speaking of asking. Next question comes from James Pindle on our panel.
That's right. In recent weeks, we've had both Republican House Speaker John Boehner and, of course, Democratic President Barack Obama both say that the country has an immigration problem, and that in the next year they will both push for some sort of immigration reform bill. So, Mr. Ginta, I want to start with you. What kind of immigration bill could you support?
Well, what I don't support is what the President of the United States has done in issuing not one but two DACA orders going back to 2012 and then again about 6 months ago. What that has done is has allowed almost 500,000 people to cross the border into our country because they feel that they can come here essentially under an amnesty program. That is not the right policy. I called immediately for the President to rescind that order. Congresswoman Shea Porter not called for that. As a matter of fact, in the 6 years that she's been in Congress, particularly when she had the majority, James, there was nothing done by Congresswoman Shea Porter. You've got to seal that border. You've got to rescind the DACA order, and then we can update the H-1B visa process and the H-2B visa process, which is very, very important to small businesses in the North Country and parts of our state.
Ms. Shea Porter, what do you do? What kind of comprehensive, or is it comprehensive, what kind of immigration bill could you support?
Well, I support the Senate version for immigration, which, of course, Kelly Ayotte voted for, because it's a tough one and it requires a lot of benchmarks that they have to meet. But I want to correct something that Frank keeps talking about. He keeps talking about DACA, and that's deferred action against children arrivals. And what it means is that you have to be in this country since 2007 in order to be able to qualify like that. So it's just not so that somehow or another this is bringing people in. What was bringing the children in recently was the fact that they were suffering in very violent countries, and they took this very perilous journey because they were looking for some kind of relief. They turned themselves in instantly as soon as they came across the border. We need to find out who's a refugee and who is somebody just breaking the rules. If they're just breaking the rules, then we should send them back. But in order to do that, we need to make sure that we prosecute the businesses, because that's the source. If there are jobs there and they get hired, they're going to come. So the Senate bill is the right bill. It has a lot of very tough standards in it, and also to make sure that we do that.
James, I've got to say, the Congresswoman doesn't actually understand the DACA order. I mean, she's been in Congress for 6 years. She was in Congress when the Democrats had a supermajority, the House, the Senate, and the White House, and you chose to do nothing on immigration reform. Now, what you've done is support a DACA order that is allowing 550,000 people, 50,000 were children, the rest were over the age of 16. This is a significant and serious problem, not just because of that, but because of the safety and security problem that we're having now potentially for the country.
Take 30 seconds, then we have to move on.
They have to have been here since 2007, so what you're quoting just doesn't apply.
All right, moving on now. Let's go to Dan Toohey. His next question, this one's for Frank Ginta.
Next month, annual enrollments start up again for the health insurance under the federal exchanges. Last year was a rocky rollout, to say the least. What should people expect to see this year?
Well, look, we've been promised a lot of things here in the state of New Hampshire about Obamacare. Carol Shea Porter was the very person who said that if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. We've got 17,000 Granite Staters who have to pay $23 million next year in penalties. That's exactly what people should be anticipating. What I'd like to see is a far different approach than this top-down federal mandate that is stifling small businesses in this state, which is our, the backbone of our economy. 97% of our economy is driven by small business. But people like Carol Shea Porter seem to think that this is working. 65% of the state doesn't want it, but she's doubling down on it, and I think that's disappointing. I think that's why we need to replace Carol Shea Porter.
Well, we're seeing the new rates. Anthem's rates are flat, so it's the first time that we haven't seen this major increase there. This was a Republican idea, by the way, and I commend them for it. It was a good idea. They called it no free ride, and they didn't want people to be uninsured and go in the hospital and drive the costs up for the rest of us. So, I commend them for that. But I would point out that we now have 5 insurance companies coming in January. Every hospital will have at least 3. And all of these are private insurance companies. They all are private insurance companies. They're on a thing called the exchange of the marketplace. But everyone is a private insurance company. Most people have insurance through their employer, but this is a marketplace for people who do not have insurance through their employer to go and get insurance.
Dan, we've been promised that this is going to work. Who knows how many carriers are actually going to come to the state? But the one thing we do know from these carriers that claim they're going to come is that none of them are going to cover the entire state of New Hampshire, and none of them are going to be accessible to every individual on an individual plan or to small business owners. The reality is this is a $2 trillion bill that is so far insuring 6 million people. More than $300,000 per insured is what taxpayers are spending, and this is the piece of legislation that Carol Shea Porter says is her most prominent and the piece of legislation that she's most impressed.
Congresswoman, take 30 seconds and we got to move on.
Yes, Alf Algar in the hospital in Rochester at Frisbee said that the Affordable Care Act has made more insurance affordable for more people, and that it's also made hospitals and doctors more efficient. And so I don't know what his plan is. He doesn't have one. But there's something wrong if people can't get insurance because they had a pre-existing condition. There's something wrong if people get left out because they were sick too long. We fixed a problem that your party did not fix for decades. And so we will be doing some fixes, and I hope they'll stop voting to repeal so we can actually get to some of the fixes. But
we are moving on.
I honestly don't think the 7,000 people in Rochester who are no longer able to go to their own hospital feel like this is a good fix.
That's not so, Frank.
All right, we're going to move forward to a viewer question now. We've been asking viewers and readers for the last couple of weeks to send in some ideas. This one is coming from Kelly Fowler out of Epping. The question is, I think that we would all agree that our veterans deserve access to timely medical care. In light of the recent scandal at the VA, do you believe that the change in leadership at the VA will fix the problem, or is there more that needs to be done? And if so, what would you propose? Congresswoman Shea Porter, you go first.
Well, I had a bill starting back in my first term saying that we needed to give local access to veterans because they were traveling so far to Boston for some treatment. And over the period of time, I strengthened that so there was a clinics, and so it was getting better. But we do see this big problem out of Phoenix and out of other hospitals, and we still have to travel. So I was very proud to sponsor and vote for the bill that allows our veterans to have local access. And my husband's a veteran. I was very proud to be a military spouse. I know how important this is, and so we took action. We also said that from now on, anybody who is in a level of a high level can be removed right away instead of having to go through a lot of personnel challenges to it so that the VA can respond more quickly.
Mr. Gitta, same question to you. Satisfied with the change in leadership, or more need to be done there?
I'm not satisfied in the change in leadership. I mean, this was an issue that President Obama knew about when he first took office. Eric Shinseki, our former secretary, specifically stated publicly he knew about it and that he was going to solve it. Carol Shea Porter has been in office for 6 years. She serves on a committee with a subcommittee that oversees military personnel and did very, very little over that course of that 6-year period to do anything to try to change this problem that we have. The reality is any veteran should have a very simple thing, a card where you can go to a VA or any hospital of your choice in your community. Veterans should not have to be fighting for benefits, particularly given the fact that they have provided us the freedom that we appreciate and we appreciate having here in the United States. So I'll continue to work with veterans to make sure that happens.
We are going to move on now. I want to move to a lightning round of question answers. Be right around 30 seconds. Congresswoman Shea Porter, we're going to start with you. I'm sure a lot of people will be wondering about this answer. How much do you think a gallon of gas should cost realistically?
Well, the price of gas is set on the world market, which makes it very difficult for Americans now. But because there has been a lot of domestic production, it's sitting a little bit above $3, and one of my staffers told me she found it for $2.95. So that's still a squeeze for the middle class. We know that. But again, the prices are set. We're competing on a world market, and so I'm relieved that the prices have dropped. But it is still a lot of money.
So no specific number where you'd say, that's good enough.
Well, we don't get to say anything about it because, again, this is a world market, and we cannot force oil companies to. These are private companies, and we can't force them to set prices.
That said, Mr. Ginta, how much do you think we should be paying for a gallon?
I filled up today at $3.03. I think it should be where the numbers before Carol Shea Porter took office 6 years ago, which was $1.95. That's exactly what people want to see is a reduction in their cost of living, not a massive increase in their cost of living.
You guys remember Edward Snowden?
Mm-hmm. Yeah? Yes, we do.
So, Mr. Ginta, do you think he's a traitor or a patriot?
I don't think he's a patriot. No, not at all.
Traitor?
Yes, I do.
Should he face charges?
Yes, he should. He should come home, face charges, and there should be a better way that we should be able to find whistleblower status for individuals if there is something going on. But what he did, I think, was not American.
Congresswoman Shea Porter.
Yeah, I think that if he wanted to tell his story, there were plenty of people that he could have gone to in Congress and elsewhere and told them this was the wrong place to do that. And so, therefore, even though the information was shocking and we're taking steps to fix it, it was the wrong thing to do. And I think he should come home and face the charges.
What issue is keeping you up at night, Congresswoman?
The economy. Jobs. We know that we are recovering still. It's been a long climb. We are recovering, but it's not fair. And this election has to be about fairness. So I live in Rochester. I live in a middle-class neighborhood. I come from the middle class. I see the struggle of the wages are flat and that families are still having a hard time making ends meet. And I really worry about that and the young people and what's going to be there for them if we don't stimulate, the economy more, create more jobs.
Economic issues keeps her awake. What's keeping you up?
Yeah, what keeps me awake is the fact that I run into people each and every day that are homeless, that don't have access to good jobs, that don't have access to quality education. I'm the first in my family to go to college and graduate school. My mother had breast cancer. My father has heart disease, and I've got a family member that I'm a caregiver for that's mentally ill. These are things that are real in my life and that are real in other families' lives across the Granite State. And those are the things that I worry about, which is why I decided to run again.
One more quick one in the lightning round. Put you both on the spot here, Mr. Ginta. Who's your all-time favorite New Hampshire governor?
All-time favorite New Hampshire is Steve Merrill.
Congresswoman Shea Porter?
Oh, no, you don't.
You still have 28 more seconds.
Yeah,
you want to think about it.
No, you don't. One thing I have learned in this business is, we have some really wonderful governors. Maggie Hassan has been absolutely awesome, but I don't think it's really a good thing to say this great governor is this much better than this other great governor, but I can name a bad governor.
Okay, so we're going to move forward. Okay. That wasn't the question, but thank you very much. All right, time now. Let's get to our candidate portion of this debate. We told each campaign before tonight's debate that I have 20 seconds to ask the question to each other, and this first one goes to, I believe we drew earlier today. Shea Porter asked the question first of Mr. Ginta. Please go ahead.
Okay, so Frank, in your ad today, you're claiming that you've been cleared by the Ethics Committee, but the Ethics Committee was not the one that's investigating you. It's the Federal Election Commission, FEC.gov, for anybody who wants to look at it. So are you going to deny, because at 5:02 today, we called, and your case is not closed. It is open. So you're going to deny that you're still being investigated by the FEC? And can you explain why you had all that money in your form, your disclosure form, paying a high-powered law firm for a firm that specializes in FEC problems?
So here's what happens in politics today. A Democrat files a complaint against an individual, and then they get to run ads that saying you're being investigated. So I have been attacked by Carol Shea Porter since 12 hours after I became the nominee back in September, and then subsequent attacks from her supporters, from the DCCC and others. So I finally responded, and I gave a very specific response today. The FEC in December of 2010, a month after the election, and before I was even sworn into office, said that I was exonerated, that I was in full compliance. The FEC has thousands of complaints because this has become a strategy by Democrats across the country to file complaints against Republicans. What I really think is that people want to get back to substantive public policy issues. But I decided to put the ad up because you're lying about my record, and I think people in New Hampshire ought to know the truth.
Take 30 seconds.
Okay, so the former head of the New Hampshire GOP, Fergus Cullen, said recently that you are one subpoena away from a scandal and that he didn't believe your story. And the FEC case is still open, fec.gov. And I was not the one who made the complaint ever, by the way. It was made by one of your Republican opponents. They are the ones that opened up that case with the FEC.
Sure. Tough fought primary, and then the Democrats actually filed all the subsequent complaints. So the reality is this is becoming nothing more than political posturing. The Democratic Party has done this in the state of New Hampshire against other candidates and across the country. And again, Carol, I think what people really want to know about are the public policy issues that affect average families across our state and across our country.
The next question that actually is coming from you, Mr. Ginta of Shea Porter. Carol Shea Porter, excuse me, man.
Well, thank you very much, Josh. Congresswoman, when I was a member of Congress, I voted to end automatic pay increases for members of Congress. I cut my own office budget twice by 11.4%. I returned $150,000 to the Treasury, and I supported legislation to reduce my own pay. Conversely, in your 6 years in Washington, you have refused to support no budget, no pay. You have given staffers bonuses to the tune of $25,000 when you lost, and you've received 2 pay increases during that period of time. Why can you look at Granite Staters, middle-class Americans, and tell them that that's fair, that you are more out for yourself than middle-class America?
Okay, well, first of all, I voted against my pay also, so I don't support the pay increases, and I know that you did as well, so that's good. I commend you for that. Secondly, you cut the Seacoast office. You said that you're going to be accessible to constituents, but you closed the Seacoast office. So you only had one office open, one in Manchester, that made it very easy for you to just go 10 minutes down the road, but you left out half of the people in our district. So I don't think you should point out any money saved. You had an obligation to take care of them. And in addition, you took that money and you spent more money on mailers than anybody else in Congress. Campaign-style mailers that were paid by taxpayers instead of keeping the constituent office open.
Actually, the GAO was the one that actually wanted the office closed because they said there were environmental problems with that building and there were air quality problems with the building. So, to be fair, we wanted to close it down because the GAO required it.
Why don't you open it somewhere else? I opened it in Rochester. We have 2 offices, Rochester and Manchester.
Well, if I'm fortunate enough to be the next member of Congress, maybe we'll do that.
Okay, we're going to move forward now. Next question coming from Dan Toohey.
Mr. Ginta, what's the single best thing Congress can do to help the American economy create jobs?
Well, we can do 2 things. Number one,